Well, good morning. It's good to see everyone this morning. It's Mother's Day, and we are honoring our mothers. Of course, I personally think mothers ought to be honored every day. It's not just
Amen.
on one Sunday a year, because our mothers do a lot, and it's something that we, should do on a regular basis is honor our mothers uh, throughout the year, not just a Sunday in May. And I'm thankful for my mother, and I'm sure everyone here is thankful for their mother as well, and what they shared with us growing up. And the fact that my parents took me and my sister to church on a regular basis. And of course, I got saved, and then things happened from there. And it's very good. I've lived a very blessed life because of what all my mother did, and father as well. So we have a lot to be thankful for today, and so forth. Uh, One thing I forgot to cover in the introduction to Job that is quite controversial even today is, did Job see dinosaurs? There are two terms that are used in the book of Job, and some Bible scholars believe that they were dinosaurs. The one they believe was a brontosaurus, and another one they're not sure what it is. Some scientists believe that he saw a hippopotamus and a very large alligator. We don't know what exactly he saw because the description is not clear. So, I just wanted to mention that we really don't know what Job saw and what he's describing, but one day when we get to heaven, we'll know.
Where in the world is that?
Huh?
Where does that talk about that in here? I mean,
I don't have the verses right off the top of my head. I can look them up, and
I just,
the word is behemoth and Leviathan, but I don't know the verses that they're in. I can look it up.
A lot of scholars think that was a hippopotamus, but I don't, because of the fact that the Bible describes the beast as having a tail the strength of a oak tree or something, and it's.
The hippopotamus tail is about that long.
So I've always thought it was something else, but.
Well, different people, even the Jewish sages, I looked it up in Sephora, and they don't agree on what it is. Some of them think it was a dinosaur. Some of them, we don't know.
I talked about that one time. Got filmed in for a class.
So, we don't really know, and it's whatever it was, it's one of God's creatures, and he,
Some of those dinosaurs' offsprings are pretty famous today.
correct.
Kentucky Fried Chicken.
But anyway, so
They all turn. Some of them are still around. That birds are.
that's right. But we don't know for sure what exactly it was he saw, and it's one of those curiosity things people talk about. Oh, Job saw dinosaurs. Well, it was after the flood. So, not sure what he saw. But I agree with what Gary Tuttle said, was that the description of the tail of this creature makes you tend to think it was a brontosaurus. Because if you've seen a picture of a brontosaurus, what he describes there fits. But we don't know. To be truthful, we really don't know. But when we get to heaven, we'll find out, and then we'll all know. And it'll, it's just one of those things that, people like to think outside the box, and they try to make things, bigger maybe than what they should be.
I wonder, did Job, the one of the two that was big, was that the behemoth? Is that the reason for that description in today's English language? Like, no, look at that heifer over there. She's pretty behemoth. You know what?
We believe so, yes. That the development of that word from the Hebrew is how we determine large animals today.
From the Hebrew, that
Right.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's something that's been around for many centuries. It's just, it occasionally pops up, and it all comes from the Hebrew for this creature that Job saw with a giant tail. So it'll be, like I said, we don't know for sure what he saw, but I just wanted to bring it up because from time to time people talk about those kinds of things and what did Job see. And like I said in our introduction last week, we think he lived around the same time as Abraham. We don't know exactly. It doesn't say. He's much further east than where Abraham was. So, they would have never met unless, God had intended for them to. But like I said, we don't know exactly who wrote the book, but we know it's God's word. And that's, what we have to, deal with. Last week we looked at chapter 1, and the title of the lesson of this series is, Why Do the Righteous Suffer? Why do they suffer? Today I want to introduce a second thought in our study as we read chapter 2 is, how should the righteous suffer? How should the righteous suffer? And we're going to look at this as we develop this story in this series. Now today we're going to look at some verses from chapters 2 and 3. Next week we're going to look at some scripture in chapter 38 and 39. And then in week 4 we're going to look at some scripture in chapter 40, 41, 42, and we're going to close out in the book of Habakkuk. So that's where we're headed in our studies and so forth. So should be interesting. I want to begin reading today in Job. I want to go back and read the last part of chapter 1, verse 21 and 22. This is Job speaking, and he said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in verse 22, in all of this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. Job has lost all of his possessions, including his 10 children. And he closes out, chapter 1 and says, blessed be the name of the Lord. And Job still didn't sin. He didn't understand what's going on, but he knew that God was in control. I'm not sure many of us would have that same attitude, but anyway, Job.
You'd have to wonder, what did I do wrong to keep bringing this down on me? I would think that, but.
Right. Well, and this is one of the things, if you look at Job's first 3 friends that come, they said, you've sinned, you need to clean up your life.
Yeah.
And all 3 of them said the same thing. Of course, God rebukes the 3 men later for their assumptions because they didn't know the counsel of God. But Job had not sinned and was not worthy of what occurred to him. It was and as we'll see today, it's a thing between God and Satan.
Well, a lot of people back then also thought if something bad happens to you, then you sin, you're being punished.
Right.
That was the logic.
Well, and the same thing happened with Jesus.
Yeah.
The disciples asked one day, they said, who sinned, him or his parents? They thought because the guy was afflicted, somebody sinned, and they wanted to know, did he sin or did his parents sin? And Jesus said neither. It was for his glory, for God's glory, or it's for Christ's glory. So it's not necessarily sin that causes these things. There's an ultimate purpose for it, and that's the same with Job. As we'll see in week 4, there's an ultimate purpose behind all of this. Chapter 2, verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And we believe the sons of God are angels. And they are coming to God, before God, just as in chapter 1. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. So here it is, once again, Satan is in the throne room of God. The second time. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Pretty much the same thing he said in chapter 1. I'm just walking around, looking around. Verse 3, Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Once again, God knows what Satan is thinking. Of course, Satan has no clue what God knows. Satan is a finite being, and he just knows what he knows at that point. He has no special powers. My servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. Once again, God is expressing to Satan the attributes of Job. He's blameless and he shuns evil. And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. So God makes sure that Satan understands he's responsible for what has happened to Job. It's hard sometimes to grasp that there's this battle going on and Job is in the middle of it, and yet he doesn't know. But it's the battle between God and Satan. And it'll always be until the great white throne judgment. Verse 4, so Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. Satan says, you haven't done enough. He's still got his health. You know, you've got a hedge of protection around him. You've blessed him. But you take that away and he'll curse you. And it's something else, you know, when you lose your health. It's bad. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. So now Satan is going into phase 2 of his affliction on Job. But God says you can't take his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. And a potsherd is a flat wooden stick. You just take a stick and it's about 1/4 of an inch thick, kind of like just a plain kind of board, and he's scraping his boils with this piece of wood.
That had to hurt.
Well, I guess it was itching, and he was trying to scratch it. I don't know. When it says these painful boils, and later on we get some more details, they're not sure what it was he had, what disease he had, because later on, if you read, his friends come over, they don't even recognize him. So, and we know his skin had gotten very dark looking as well. As you read through this whole scenario, he's you know, his friends are there with him for 7 days and don't even know who he is at first. So it has to be immensely painful. And he's sitting there scrubbing or scratching these with a piece of wood. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Wow. That had to hurt. She said, curse God and die. And Job, is sitting here, and now his wife has turned on him. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. He's lost all of his possessions. His wife has turned against him, but he still doesn't sin. He still maintains his integrity. I'm not sure how far we could go with that. It's one thing to have a relationship, but when your wife and your family's gone, your wife turns on, things look pretty bleak. And another thing, we don't know what Job's age is at this time. We don't know anything about his childhood. We don't know his wife's name. There's so much we don't know. How did he learn about God? We're not told. We jump in the middle of a story. Job, his wife, 10 kids, and then great possessions. And he's has a very close relationship to God, but we don't know how that developed. We come in the middle of Job as an adult, and that's all we know. We don't know how he came, how he got in touch with God, his early life. We know none of that. We're just we're in the middle of a story of Job, and all of a sudden, Satan is appearing in the throne room of God, and God picks Job. Job didn't volunteer. So it's interesting how things develop here very quickly. He afflicts Job, and Job doesn't sin. He comes back, afflicts Job a second time, this time with his health. And yet Job doesn't sin. And in verse 11, Job's three friends show up. Now, when Job's three friends heard of all this adversity, they had come upon him, each one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shunammite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Now, the first gentleman, we think he was east of where Job was. Bildad was south, and Zophar was real close as far as historical records go. We don't know exactly. It doesn't give a city, it just gives a nationality of where they were from. And based on world history, we know sort of the area these folks would have come in. Now, the first gentleman is supposed to be from a city of wise people. According to world history, the first guy came from a city of very wise people. Very wise. They studied all of the all of the sciences there. The other two, we have no clue. There is not enough archaeological information on these other two places other than about the area they were in. It doesn't give us a city or anything, but the first one was known for their wisdom, and they studied all of the science according to archaeologists. So the first guy is supposed to be the smart one, and we'll find out real quick he's not really that smart. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. So these three gentlemen have decided to come and to sit with Job, mourn with him, and try to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. So these three gentlemen are traveling to see Job, and they didn't recognize him. And they started weeping. And each one tore his robe, which is a Middle Eastern custom. If you come upon somebody and you're really mourning, then you would rip your robe off and you would show that you're in mourning with them. Now, please remember, they dressed in layers. In other words, just like Jesus, they'd have on one garment and then they'd have on a cloak or maybe something over that. It was dressed in layers. So when he ripped his robe, that was the outer garment. There were still other garments underneath. Okay, don't people, hear about ripping clothes and all this and thinking they're exposing themselves. No. They dressed in layers because a lot of times it would get very hot in the day, so they'd take everything off. Well, at the night it would get cold and they'd put them back on. If you've ever been out there particularly in Israel, sometimes at night it gets pretty chilly. So, they dressed according to the environment, and we also don't know exactly the season. Was it summer, winter? We don't know. And as David brought out last week, this event goes on for about a year and a half. We don't know exactly because we're not given specific date information, but based on what Bible scholars believe, it lasted about a year or a little bit longer. So this is not something that just happened over a couple of months. This drug on for quite some time. And we don't know how long it took for these gentlemen to travel. It says they traveled and when they saw him afar off, but that could have, particularly the first gentleman who was from the area of wisdom, they think, he probably traveled the furthest of the group, which had been 3 days.
Wasn't it also back then, excuse me, their outer garment was usually their most valuable garment? And
Yes.
They would shed it saying, I give what I have to suffer with you.
Yeah, the outer garment was the most valuable and was usually very well decorated.
Good colors.
Right, with like the coat of many colors and so forth that we've read about and so forth. So, yeah, a lot of times the outer garment was the best garment of the bunch because that's what people saw. And it's just like, us, if we're going to dress up to go to a special event, we'll put on good clothes. And that's sort of what this is representative of at their time. Of course, they wore it every day, but some of them may have had a change, wear the blue one day and the red one the next day or whatever. but it was usually, like Gary said, something that was very much kind of a showpiece. And so each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. Once again, another Middle East custom. They would take dust and they would raise their hand up and they would shake it out over their head as, again, a show of humility to Job, that they were in mourning with him. Now, we don't see that a lot going on today in our culture, but back then, that, sitting sackcloth and ashes and so forth was very, very common in that day. But they would take the dust and sprinkle it over their head, and that was their thing. So they sat down with him on the ground, which another custom was when they were in mourning. They wouldn't sit in a seat or something. They would sit on the ground. 7 days and 7 nights. So for 7 days and 7 nights, these 3 gentlemen sat with Job. And no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So 3 gentlemen have come to comfort and mourn with Job, and they get there. They initially don't recognize him. And then they sat down with him, and for 7 days and 7 nights, nothing happens. They just sit there looking at each other, I guess. It's, I guess they didn't know what to say. And I think some of us have been in situations where something has happened to an individual, and you just don't know what to say. The words just aren't there. And I think we've all at one point in our adult life have been in a situation where you just don't know what to say. And that's where these gentlemen are. They've, you would expect, particularly the one, Eliphaz, would have had all this wisdom. He would have had something to say. But these 3 gentlemen, they don't have anything to say. That they don't know what to say. And I think we've all been there. And then in chapter 3, it says, after this, Job opened his mouth. Okay, this is day 8. Okay, of when the 3 friends have arisen. And after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job spoke and said, may the day perish on which I was born, and the night in which it was said, a male child is conceived. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. May darkness and shadow of death claim it. May a cloud settle on it. May the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, may darkness seize it. May it not rejoice among the days of the year. May it not come to the number of the months. Oh, that the night may be barren. Job is upset that he was born. He has gotten to this point he's lost all that he had. He's lost 10 kids. His wife has appeared to have turned on him. His 3 friends have showed up, and for 7 days and 7 nights they haven't spoken to him. And now on the 8th day, Job finally opens his mouth, and he's upset that he was even born. And he goes through this dialogue. Well, it's actually a monologue to his friends, and he's upset that he was even born. And in verse 25 of chapter 3,
3? 3? Okay.
chapter 3, verse 25, for the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, for trouble comes. So Job has gone through chapter 3, and he's upset that he was even born. And you can read through this whole thing, but he's he understands. He says, what I have dreaded has come upon me. In other words, this adversity that I dread has finally happened. I've lost my kids. I've lost my possessions. My wife's turned on me. I've got this major health issue. It's all here. And he says, I have no rest, for trouble comes. I'm sure that with whatever the exact affliction was, Job it was hard to sleep. I know, when certain illnesses come, it's very hard to get rest. Trying to get comfortable so you can rest. And if he has these boils from the top of his head to the soles of his feet, and I'm sure they're on his back, is on his stomach, is on his legs and arms, I think it would be very hard to get comfortable and be able to rest. And, he's, and his friends haven't said anything, so he's finally decided it's time for me to say something. And he starts talking about, I just wish I hadn't been born. And then in chapter 4, verse 1, then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, if one attempts a word with you, will you become weary? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Surely you have instructed many, and you have strengthened weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling. He's praising Job. And you have strengthened the feeble knees. So he's telling, Job, you've encouraged all these people. You've done all of these wonderful things. Verse 5, but now it comes upon you, and you are weary. It touches you, and you are troubled. Is not your reverence, your confidence, and the integrity of your ways our hope? Remember now, whoever perishes being innocent, or where the upright were cut off, even as I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. So he's saying, you've done all these wonderful things, but, maybe you sinned. And that's, we've already read Job didn't sin. But it goes back to that mindset that if you sin, you're sick. And just like the disciples, did this man sin or did his parents sin? Jesus said nobody sinned. So once again, that Middle East culture, if you sin, you're going to get sick. And that is not necessarily the case in this faith. But that same mindset comes here among his three friends. You sinned, you need to repent, and God will heal you. And Job says, I haven't sinned. And I think that's the struggle that Job has is, I haven't sinned, and yet I've got all of this adversity. And now my health has been attacked. I've got these boils. So it's a continuing thing of, I think a mental issue with Job is, I haven't sinned, I love God, but yet this is happening to me. And as we'll see, God's going to finally show up and talk to Job, but he does so out of a whirlwind. And people say, well, why did God speak to Job out of a whirlwind? Because you can't look upon God and live. So God produces a whirlwind, which we think is very much like a tornado, and God moves the tornado around, and he talks to Job out of the tornado. Later on, as we'll see next week in chapters 38 and 39, when he talks to Job and begins to question him, and Job and God have a conversation. And it's I'm sure it was quite interesting. God's there in a whirlwind, and Job is standing there, and they're conversing in a very particular way. But it goes back to Job's friends didn't understand what was going on, and all they had was what they understood was, if you sinned, you got sick, and if you repented, you got well. And that's where all this goes. Is in chapters 5, 6, and 7 and 8, it's this conversation between Job and his friend, and Job says, I don't understand this, and my complaint to God is just. I'm not sinned, and I don't understand why this is going on. And his friends keep saying, you sinned, you sinned, you sinned. Job says, no, I haven't sinned. So it's this back and forth between Job and his three friends of what is going on, and they don't understand. And like I said, next week when we look at chapters 38 and 39, we'll begin to piece the puzzles together. What happened? What's going on? Does anyone have a question or comment? I encourage you to, as we go through this, to sit down and read through some of the book of Job. It's very interesting to hear, Job's complaints and so forth, But then when we get to verse 38, or chapters 38 and 39, we begin to entertain God's 77 questions to Job. And it's,
I guess it's personal, but a personal opinion, but I think that's one of the best lessons you ever had. I went through Job myself 50 years ago or so, a little bit more than that. I read all that stuff, but it never hit me quite the same as it does now.
yeah, after you get in your adult years, your perspective on life changes, particularly as I think now, after having gone through the pandemic and all the family that, I can speak for me personally, all the family that I lost to COVID-19, things change. Your perspective changes about life, suffering, and what happened, and so forth. And like, I know my first cousins, they were good people, but circumstances beyond them happened, and they got sick, and eventually, went to the hospital and put on respirators and died. It happened.
I think it's human nature too, that when tragedy like that happens, we want to blame something or somebody,
Yeah, there's blame.
Yeah, and it's, the first one you want to blame, it seems like, is God. Well, why did you let this happen? I've been a good servant to you, or whatever, So I think, like Dick said, reading Job there kind of puts it a little more in perspective,
Yeah, I mean, our tendency is to blame somebody for something. Somebody's to blame, and usually God gets pretty close to the top of the list. And it's because, and we'll see this next week, and after that, the week after, we'll begin to see pieces of what was going on in the throne room of God here in chapters 1 and 2, what was really going on there. People say, well, what's going, we don't know. Well, yes, we do, because in 38 and 39 next week, we'll figure out why God did what it was. And, it won't bring our loved ones back, but it'll help us understand who God is. He's sovereign, He's just, He's righteous, and it's like the passage that, good will come to those who love the Lord. Folks, if you love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, we may not understand it, but good at the end of the day will happen. And yeah, there's going to be grief and sorrow, and I know that the Apostle Peter lost his wife to martyrdom, and I'm sure that Peter was upset because she died as a Christian spokesperson. But it happened. And, I'm sure that Peter and his wife, are on Hallelujah Boulevard right now. And they're happy for their service. But it's not easy. And it's like the saying, God never promised us a flower-petaled walkway or sunshine every day, but He did promise strength for the day and happiness at the end. And that's all, there is. And we just have to struggle some days. But as long as we trust God, it'll all be okay one day. And we'll get our crowns. Anybody got but that's a good thought, Dick. Thank you. Anybody else have a question or comment? Okay. Any updates on the prayer list?
I need to add James to the prayer list this next week. Wednesday, he's having a biopsy on his right lung to see what the nodule is.
Okay.
James. Wednesday morning.
Wednesday morning. Okay. We'll keep that. Yes,
We
great.
have Lisa Trot, which is Dick's daughter-in-law and mine. She starts chemo and radiation in about 10 days. And, she's very upbeat about it and everything.
Everything's going pretty good for her right now. This is just a prevention for down the road.
I understand.
I have a friend, Shirley Crenshaw. She has colon cancer, but something has come up behind her eye, and she can't see out of one of the eyes. And they're checking, thinking maybe the cancer is spreading in her body.
Okay. We'll add Miss Shirley to the list as well. Any other?
Well, after we get down to the prayer list, Gracie, you wanted to say something about a get
Right.
together or something, didn't you? After we do
Billy,
the
you
prayer
want to
list.
say something too, don't you?
Yeah, go ahead first.
Well, we do finish the prayer list first, then we get to that, so. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. We have talked, some of us have talked about getting together in dinner time or lunchtime, like we used to quite a bit. And one of the things that we have named different restaurants, Butner's, which we all love, Broadway Diner, Golden Corral, and Fried Tomatoes. We were gonna do it on a Thursday or Friday afternoon, and I had it at May 18th and 19th, but that's over with. So I'm thinking of May 25th or 26th, Thursday or Friday is what we're gonna do it on, or June the 1st and the 2nd. If we go to Broadway Diner or Butner, we would take the church bus. Otherwise, we would just, so I would like for people to sign up so we can see how many would like to go and everything.
Okay.